responsibilities of research administration. Then for the first session, we're going to divide into pre-assigned breakout groups. We're going to break you up by organization and region and have you all discuss administrative support at your organization. You're going to compare and contrast. And I'm going to ask that each breakout group have an assigned person that's going to be the person that's going to report out and synthesize the information from your breakout group when we get into the larger group. Then in the second session, we're going to do a really interesting discussion about how administrators support investigators and some of the challenges that we encounter. And then we're going to get into just a randomly assigned breakout groups where we are going to just share best practices and the key attributes to be a successful investigator. I want to pass it to Shane. We're going to introduce ourselves. I introduced myself last week, but I'm Holly Castle, an assistant director here at the Institute for Global Health. I have about 18 years or more of research administration experience working on research projects as well as training projects all over the world. I currently work in Zambia at the University of Zambia and in Nigeria at Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital and growing partnerships at the Orem Institute in South Africa. So I'll pass it to you, Shane.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to start by saying I'm really pleased to be here and included in this. I have also been a research administrator for about 20 years, primarily working at the central institutional level, supporting grants and research projects. I also teach here at Vanderbilt a program for research administrators that's 12 weeks long, where we kind of immerse new administrators in all of the details of research administration. So that's kind of my experience with this program, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you as we do this today. Okay, so we're going to just dive right in here to the slides. I have a quote here. If anybody's listening on their phone, I will read this off, but then the idea is I want you to guess when this was published. So the quote is, "The research administrator is seen as the man in the middle, caught between the frequently conflicting goals of the research scientist and the research organization. In his attempts to maintain controls, many of which may be required by higher authority over the allocation and use of the scarce resources of the organization, the administrator is the focal point for the scientists grumbling about red tape and worse, unnecessary interference with research. The levels of performance as well as the rewards experienced by administrators are affected by the ambiguities and inherent strains still incorporated in this relatively new role." So if you have a guess as to what year this was published or even what decade this was published, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. We'll see who can get close. All right, somebody's got a guess already. All right, so we got 50s, 1980, 1950, 2001. I'm glad everybody's guessing. 2000. So we've got quite a range of guesses here. 1995. All right, Holly, you want to do the big reveal? All right, it was 1959. And I think as we progress through the slides, it'll become, hopefully we can explain why it was then. But I think you can all agree that with the exception of some of the language in this quote, it's still applicable today. Even if this was published in 1959, we're going to talk about how much of this is still true today. So the big point that I think that quote was trying to make is that research administrators are kind of stuck in the middle between supporting the investigators, really helping them get their projects done, helping them move the science forward, but also they have to follow all of these compliance rules and regulations that can sometimes make it difficult to move the science forward or to create some hurdles to project management. And so it's really the research administrator's role to balance those two priorities, right? To continue to support the investigators, but also make sure that all the rules and regulations are followed along the way. And so it does kind of create a strain for the research administrator. So on this slide, you can see the administrator is in the middle, and you have all these other kind of job functions around the outside, whether that's the academic department, the department chair, if that's the kind of organization you're in, human resources, payroll, travel, purchasing, grants and contracts. And it's the research administrator's job to enable the investigator, right? Like, so they should be the central point of contact. The investigator has questions about any of these areas, payroll, HR, grants and contracts. Hopefully they can go to their administrator to get answers to their questions. And even if the administrator doesn't know the answers, they know where to get the answers, right? Like, they know where to find out this information. And so the model that we talk about is the administrator is the first point of contact for the investigator, right? Like, they support them and they can get them answers to these kind of compliance questions as they arise. So to go a little bit deeper into this, we're going to talk about the different models that organizations can follow as they structure their research administration support. So we'll talk about kind of the two extremes, the decentralized model, and we'll talk about what that looks like. Then we'll talk about a centralized model and how that is different. And then we'll talk about how most organizations are some hybrid between these two. And we'll talk a little bit about how Vanderbilt is structured so that you have a point of comparison when you go into your breakout rooms and you're talking about how this is structured at your institution. You've got something to compare it to. You want to add anything here, Holly? Okay. So to start, we'll talk about what a decentralized model looks like. So here, the research administration tasks and responsibilities are usually integrated into existing roles. Maybe there is an administrative support personnel who already works with the investigator. Now they also help with research activities. The professional staff who support research are embedded in the laboratory or in the departments with the investigators and support them on a day-to-day basis. If there is any central office support, it's really mostly outward facing, right? Like, it helps establish relationships outside of the institution, or it functions with getting the scientific results out of the institution, or it works with the government, or it works with the sponsoring agencies. But it's not really providing a lot of support to the individual investigators. That support is provided by administrators working closely with them. So this is the decentralized model. So you want to think about it as administrators are working very closely with the investigators on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah. And so for context, you all represent different types of organizations, some academic institutions, some non-government institutions. Some of you work in academic medical centers that have various levels of experience with grants. And so sometimes an organization, their grants office, if you will, there are administrative hubs that organically form around investigators that submit grants. And that may be how your organization is now, or it may have evolved out of that, where you have administration and the School of Medicine, because that's where a lot of your faculty or investigators do research. And then over here in veterinary medicine, you've got people, and so it's decentralized. And then there may be some central offices like finance and stuff like that. So it's the models may ebb and flow with time.
So in contrast, a more centralized model is where the leadership around research is really at the institutional level, right? So there's executive leadership there that provides kind of the mission. They set policies and procedures around how research is conducted, or what the rules are for the institution. If there's pre-award and post-award support, meaning for kind of getting grants applications out the door or managing them, it's provided by centralized personnel who have specialized training in doing this in like one central office. In these models, it's often you might hear referred to as like cradle to grave, or from start to finish, these central offices oversee the project and provide both support and compliance in one office for the whole institution, or a couple of small offices for the entire institution, rather than having the support working closely with the investigator day to day. And we'll talk about kind of the benefits of both of these models as we go on. But right now, just kind of showing you the extremes.
For the centralized, you can think about, this, you may see this in an NGO where the administration is just a core group of people and they serve all of the NGO. It also can be seen in the US, at least, in some of our small, what we call community colleges or small universities, where research administration basically serves all of the institution, and it's more of like a service corps. So that's a centralized model.
So as we alluded to in the beginning, and as Holly has reiterated, most institutions fall somewhere on this spectrum. They might have elements of both of these models, right? In some parts, they have central support and management, and other places, maybe more experienced research departments have some of their own administrators working with the faculty or with the investigators. So we recognize that every institution is different, and they probably don't fit into one of these categories neatly. And so we'll talk a little bit about now what are these central offices when you do have centralized support, what they can do, and maybe what some of the benefits are of having centralized support versus having decentralized support, which I think is obvious. When you have decentralized support and you have an administrator that works closely with an investigator, they can build a relationship, they can support them day in and day out. So that has a lot of benefits. But we're also going to talk about what the benefits are for having more centralized support.
And we recognize, you all are, some of you come from central offices, some of you work in departments. And some of this, may be conjuring questions that you have to say, I actually don't know what the administrative structures are. So that's okay. It just lets you know that there are different models and helps you kind of think through what are the models at my organization, who makes those decisions, how are they organized.
Holly, we have a question from Awal asking about contract research organization, and would that be considered a centralized structure?
We're going to go through questions in just a little bit. Thanks, Awal.
Okay.
So I think we've started defining this, what is a central office, but this model of centralized research support kind of started in the 1960s in the United States, as you see from that quote, right? Like that quote at the very beginning was 1959. They started around that time in the US as a way to handle all the rules and regulations that were coming from new research money. So these offices are specialized. They serve the entire organization. And the idea is that they take these routine transactional activities like submitting a grant application or managing the accounting for grants and contracts, anything that's kind of repeatable that happens a lot. You get the specialized knowledge in a central office who can make it more efficient. They can lower costs for the institution, right? You're not having to relearn every time you do a new grant application what's involved. And it lets the departments or the academic units focus on doing the research and focus on students or the science to whatever extent is possible, right? Like just try and create efficiency.
So that is an Office of Contracts. So I think that answers Al's question. That's Office of Legal Affairs. That's any kind of regulatory group, you know, your IRB or your REC, that kind of thing. Those kind of offices would be centralized.
Some other things that, you know, Holly just kind of listed off, the way that those offices are structured, but what is it? Some of the other kind of smaller roles that they can perform is they can grow research activity, right? Like they can work with other organizations to build those collaborations. They can work with sponsors to say, hey, this is what we can offer, and encourage that research activity with outside organizations. They can build out central administration to do both support and compliance. They can set the culture for the whole institution in terms of things like how that organization does ethical research and how they follow the rules. They can help kind of set that culture at an institutional level. They can oversee policy. If there are things like patents or copyrights, they can pursue those, you know, kind of doing the legal paperwork to get that done. And then protect them if they need to pursue legal cases or anything like that. They can at a central office. We don't want, you know, individual investigators having to do that or a lab having to pursue that kind of thing. So central office can do that, and they can just advocate for research with the government as well. Just say how important research is and advocate for additional funding. So this graphic is just meant to kind of give you an idea of what that hybrid model looks like. In terms of numbers, you're only going to have a few central offices with a handful of people in each one doing, whether it's legal affairs, finance, or grants and contracts. And the vast majority of the administrators are going to be decentralized in the laboratories, in the departments with the investigators. Right. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand that with these hybrid models, it's not like most of the people are in these central offices. It's still the case that most of them are working as closely with the investigator as possible. You just have enough people at the central office to support these routine activities. For perspective, my office here at VUMC, which supports a huge research enterprise, we're fewer than 15 people in the central grants office, whereas there's hundreds of administrators working in individual departments.
And myself, as well as Hillary and Ann, we represent research administrators and a grants team for the Institute for Global Health. And we provide support to about 20 plus faculty. And so we work with the faculty not only in post-award to run their grants, but also in pre-award to help them find funding, help them pull their grant pieces together, edit their grant sections, help compile everything for the grant submission that then goes to Shane's office for final submission.
So again, just to kind of summarize, the benefits of having these central offices with a handful of specialized people is it lowers the costs, right? You don't have to have as many people. You don't duplicate effort in each of the labs or centers. It helps manage risk and compliance because you have the same people doing the same task over and over again. If you have a change in policy, you only have to inform a handful of people in the central office to make sure that that rule is followed. You don't have to try to inform hundreds of administrators across the institution or even dozens. You just have to make sure that a few people in the central office are aware of it. So this also provides you with scalability. If you add another group or another research team or another laboratory, right, they can just work with the central office too. You don't need to duplicate that administrative structure every time you add people to your organization. This also provides some agility. The institution can change direction quickly by only adjusting or informing a handful of people in the central offices. And it allows for transparency. If that central office is communicating out to the entire organization, everybody's on the same page. They're all being told the same message. So it does have a number of benefits to have some level of central office support. And as Holly said, in her situation, right, most of that grant application work is done by the administrators working closely with the faculty. But when it does come to the central office, we act as the signature authority for the institution. So a grant proposal can't go out the door without the central office signing off on it. So this ensures that the organization has said, we've reviewed this grant application and we agree with all the commitments that are being made. We agree with the budget, and we will support this project if it gets funded. Right. So it's both making sure that the rules are followed, but also saying we will give this institutional support if the award comes in. We will make sure that it's successful. If a negotiation needs to happen, whether that's a contract, a subaward, that's also handled at the central level. So it helps the investigator kind of maintain their relationship, scientist to scientist, without having to negotiate contract terms or things like that. And we provide guidance and oversight. So we know what the sponsors are looking for in proposals. In many cases, we've seen what rules that they're enforcing or what procedures they think are really important, and we can provide that advice to everyone at the institution.
All right, so before we dive into the breakout group, Anne, do we have any more questions?
No, Walls was the only one that I have seen personally.
Does anyone have any questions? I know it was a lot to think through. I'm speaking to a bunch of black boxes. Anybody out there? No questions? All right. If you have any questions along the way, feel free. So what we're going to do is we're going to break out into pre-assigned groups. You're going to get grouped in with people in your organization and people in your region. And each of us, the instructors, will go into the group. We work with you all. We're very familiar with the organizations. And we're going to dive into some of these definitions. You know, what services at your organization are centralized? What are decentralized? What are the challenges, the benefits, and really compare and contrast, and then pick someone in your breakout group to then when we reconvene to report out, so we can report out as a group. So it's 8:30 now. We'll go into the breakout groups for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for group discussion. So Hillary's going to break us up into breakout groups.
All right, I'm going to open the rooms and just make sure that you select, yes, I want to go to my room. Anyone in Latin America, Caribbean, we're going to stay here in the main room.
And Hillary, will there be a timer and it'll just tell us to come back? Okay.
It won't be 10 minutes, but I'll give you a 60-second warning.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, I think we've got everybody. Hi, guys. Mamadou, hi, Valentina. Mamadou, are you having issues joining your group? Okay, well, we'll just get started. Mamadou, if you can hear me and you want to join talk in our group, you can do that. All right, guys, so I think what we want to talk about is just the organizational structure at each of your institutions. So we went through a few definitions about centralized, decentralized, and then maybe a hybrid model. Do we want to start with, I'm going to go through the pictures on my Zoom. Do you want to start with the Argentina team? You guys are first on my list.
Okay, I can start and Gaby can help me. We are both from Fundación Huésped, Argentina. Fundación Huésped is an organization that started working in 1989. So we have more than 30 years of work here in Argentina, and it started working in HIV/AIDS and later expanded to other sexually transmitted infections and sexual health in general. So our organization is big, and also last year with COVID, it expanded a lot because the research part of the organization is very big. So I was thinking while I was hearing the presentation, that I think we have a lot, I don't know, Gaby, what you think of centralized services. For example, Gaby is in the administration team that is responsible for doing budgets, and then also having to, no me sale la palabra para rendir, Gaby, to make like reporting. For example, I'm in the institutional development department, and what I do is search for grants, then help the team that is going to apply to the grant in the writing, and then present it to the sponsor, and also in the report. So I think most of our services are centralized, but as you said in the presentation, there is also a hybrid part because, for example, our research direction, that is the biggest one in the foundation. I mean, of all the directions, research is the one with more people, more budget and everything. So inside their team, they have like some people working like in a decentralized form. I don't know if you can understand, but as it is the biggest team, they have like some extra people doing sometimes what I do, sometimes what Gaby does, and like specialized people inside the team. And also it's like the most independent direction among the foundation. But also it has to do because of the nature of the foundation and how it started. So I don't know if I'm clear because I'm learning the concepts and trying to apply them. And also, as you said, it's hard to define it, but I think we're in that stage.
It sounds like you guys maybe have a hybrid model. Sounds
Yes,
like.
so.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the Brazil team at Fiotech.
Vanya, do you want to say something or can I start it?
Oh, you can start it. But I
Okay.
think the Fiotech is centralized, if you agree, because we work just for Fiocruz and to manage just the project from Fiocruz in Brazil. And I agree that we part from centralized model, if you agree with me.
Sure. I think our structure is a little bit different, and I think in each country is a little bit different. But for instance, in Fiotech, this is the institution where we come from. We manage the project from a larger institution, which is Fiocruz. And we have a couple of departments, finance, legal, and logistics department. And we have initiation. We also have an initiation project department. They help the research to write their proposal to apply. For instance, CDC, they have, I don't know, they help to write a proposal to apply to CDC. And then once the project, once they are awarded, the project come from me and to Vanya. And then we start to manage the project, and we work closely with the finance department and legal department. And then we have the closeout team and the audit team as well. So I think the structure is a little bit different from, I think. What do you think, Vanya?
Yeah, I think the companies is centralized, but our activities, our work is not so centralized, in because we have to deal with the different departments, but we are the focal point with the principal investigators.
Yes.
But the company works just for one institution, is Fiocruz. But I think
Yeah.
we are centralized. I don't know. I have some
I think
doubt
so
about
too.
it.
No, I think so too. And you guys have a very interesting structure where your like centralized office is its own company, its own entity, and that's really different than a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations like Fundación Huésped, you know, everything is under Fundación Huésped, but for Fiotech, you're a totally separate entity, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. In the essence of time, we're going to move on to Renny in Peru. Can you hear us, Renny?
Yeah, sorry, I was out from minutes ago.
Yeah, that's okay. So we're just talking about organization structure. So do you think that Cayetano has centralized services or decentralized project administration? What do you think?
Sorry, do you mean Cayetano? I didn't.
Yeah, and at your organization.
Okay, in my case, in my university. Okay, we have different activities. Each research have different project. A particular project which we have different projects. In my case, we are University of Medicine, but we not only investigate medicine of persons, investigate medicine of animals, or another specialization of biology, but all the process, finally all the process are centralized in the same office of the university. For example, if I will need a service of one supplier, it seems on what do you say, jefe? A leadership.
It sounds like, so you're trying to say, I think that you have some centralized services that support your different projects?
Yes.
Okay.
We have, for example, the leader of the, what do you say, abogado? I need to use
The legal team.
legal department, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, great. And Emmanuel at Geskio, what do you think about your organization?
Good morning. Sorry, I can't turn my camera on because the internet is so bad here.
That's okay.
I think we do have, it's broken down 75-25. I think in terms of project support, we're very centralized. Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We're very centralized in that in terms of support. We have a very small group of administrators helping out with all the financial, administrative, and compliance part of grants. And I think that in terms of applying for funding, we become a hybrid because all our different departments kind of come together to fill out the different requirements for applications and any sort of funding. So I think it's a little bit of a hybrid, but more so centralized. So we have our accounting, we have our audit, we have our legal, but also coming together as a team to kind of fill all the requirements for all the grants that we have here.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for sharing. I just got a message from Holly. They need a little bit more time, which is great because I also wanted to just talk about pros and cons that you guys see from your institutions. Is there anything, do you feel like investigators like the model at your organization? Do they function well with it? Do you see issues with the way things are structured? What do you think?
For example, in Fundación Huésped, we are now in a few months ago, the director of investigations left for another job, and so he was replaced. And I don't know, Gabi, if you got to know Omar. Yes, that was the previous director. He had a very different style than the director now. So I can see, because I had to work with both, that, for example, Omar had a lot of initiative, but he was also very disorganized. And Sulma, that is the new director, is very organized. And sometimes when the way we work with the rest of the directions, because we also have a communications direction, programs, as I said, investigation is the biggest one, but we also have different directions. And we try to work that way with investigations, and they are like, I don't know how to say it, but they are like more, I don't know how to say it in English, but more difficult to work that way, because they want like to think together the whole process and put like some steps before that isn't the way we work with the rest of the direction. So anyway, as I had read in the text that we had to read for today, we are able to be flexible in that point and also adapt ourselves. But I see that difference.
Yeah, leadership can really dictate how an organization runs and the culture and just the priorities to focus on. So yeah, that's an interesting change. Thanks for sharing, Valentina. Fiotech, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that your investigative team, you're a totally separate organization? Do you feel like that causes any difficulties, any challenges, being separate, or is that a benefit?
Not at all. All the investigators permit to the closely to understand the research. If Livia agree, if me, because we have a lot of two goals to achieve in the project, but sometimes some researchers don't permit to understand more and communicate more and to know more about the research, the topic of the project. And sometimes the communications is bad during the project period. And sometimes some researchers don't permit to talk with the grants, the sponsors. And sometimes we have these problems, face these problems, because we we want to understand more about the research, but sometimes they don't permit to be more closely of them and to understand the project and to talk with the sponsors sometimes. But it's not at all the PIs. I think the most PIs allow to be more close of for grants and sponsors. So, and I think this way it's better for our work in the company. I don't know, Livia, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think, the relationship between, the relationship with the principal investigator, it's not always easy, sometimes you have to take a
Yeah.
deep breath, meditate a little bit, because it's not easy. We have, me and Vania, we have about 20 projects under our belts, and with the different organizations worldwide. So it's difficult, and sometimes I think what she was trying to say, Wanda, please correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes we want to understand a little bit more about the research and not just the managed aspects of the grants, but also about the group that I have with Marina, Valeria, and Bruno. I understand a little bit more tuberculosis and HIV and all that, but sometimes with other investigators, this is not possible. So, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
a
as as an administrator, you provide, certain levels, but if you understand the project that you're working on, you can understand better what the needs of the
Yeah.
project are. I totally understand that. Yeah, sometimes communication can be challenging.
And work
Yeah.
better. Yeah.
And we don't have a background in research, so I mean.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, most of us don't. Great. All right, guys, I'm going to bring the breakout groups back. Can I get one volunteer to just kind of give a report out of our discussion? It sounds like I'll give a summary so that it'll be easier. I think most people in our group had a centralized office system. And then you can kind of just talk about what each group individually said. I'm going to pick somebody if nobody volunteers. Okay, Valentina, will you report out for us?
Yeah, I'm a little shy, but okay.
You got this. You got this. All right, I'm going to close the breakout rooms. So they'll be back in like 60 seconds.
If you want to tell me anything else that you want me to include.
No, you can just what we talked about, kind of the challenges that come along with centralized, maybe communication can sometimes be an issue. What else did we talk about?
Leadership also.
Yeah, exactly. That's great.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Is that enough time, guys? Sorry, I didn't. Still needed more.
It's hard because
I
there's
think,
so
Sherry,
much
I
to
would have
say.
enjoyed a little bit of an interaction between, I don't think there was time for interaction, like I had some questions for Mozambique or whatever, So yeah, but anyway, we learn as we go.
Well, this is a time now for collective discussion. So I'm curious to see, you know, since we broke up in regions and organizations, you know, we have academic institutions, we have medical centers, we have NGOs. I think I can predict what's going to be said, but I'm not entirely sure. So we're going to start with Hillary's group. Who is the report out? Who's just going to summarize briefly the key points from that discussion?
It's
Yeah,
me.
Valentina.
All right, Valentina.
Hi, everybody. Anyone from my team can add anything if I'm missing out. We talked about the different types of structure, and although nobody was only one type, as we said before, there were some hybrids, but we mostly coincide in a centralized organization. So we also talked about the advantages and disadvantages of this type of organizations. And we talked about how leadership can sometimes be an advantage or a disadvantage, and how leaderships also from the research team can like change the whole process. And we also talked about the challenges in communication, especially when the research managers don't have like a background in research. So why it is important for the research team to communicate clearly about the project, and that will allow us to also do a better work. So that's a little bit what we talked about.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, we have a nonprofit, three nonprofits, and a university in our group.
Fantastic. Thank you, Valentina. All right, we'll pass to Anne's group.
Hi, yeah, we're just getting into some good discussion, but everyone was able to share. And Bilya is our fearless leader who's going to report out on what was discussed.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, in our group, we've actually discussed what is obtained in our various institutions. That is whether we operate centralized or hybrid system. So some reported that they operate hybrid system, like somebody, is it from Liberia? He reported that they have a hybrid system. So they have two groups. I think bigger grants are being managed by the higher management, while the smaller grants is being managed by some other groups. While in some other group, we have a decentralized system where we have a centralized body in the organization, and it's been all the activities going on as far as research is concerned is being controlled by the centralized system. Anything coming into the organization, all the research has to be organized, has to come through the centralized system. And all the investigators coming in for an investigation for a research, they also has to come through the centralized body, which is the hospital. And the hospital, like here in Nigeria, the hospital has organized a research grant office, which coordinate all research activities of the organizations. Even the research ethics committee, research ethics office is controlled by the hospital, so is supervised by the higher National Health Research Ethics Committee. So this is how we organize, how we operate in what we discuss in our group.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Bilya. It was interesting because in our group, you know, we had arranged so 2 hospitals, 2 academic universities, but even between the universities, the University of Sierra Leone is really operating with more of a centralized system, while the University of Liberia has kind of more of a hybrid. And I know, Holly, I think you all were planning on getting the broader group to sharing their challenges. We got into that a little bit, and I would just share that we started discussing the challenges of human resources and how you can get your institution to commit to having human resources that can play a centralized role, you know, and kind of find efficiencies there.
Thanks, Ann. So next is my group. We had South Africa, Zambia, and Mozambique represented. We had an NGO and 2 universities. And Sabina is going to report out.
Yeah, so on my team, we had, just like everyone else, more of hybrid models in our institutions. And for universities, we found that we have more of a decentralized research model, but it's more centralized. It's also centralized in the sense that certain operational departments are taken up by the universities themselves. So it's a hybrid model in that sense. We also discussed how there may be need for centralization, where we have work that is streamlined by a manager that takes up more activities in the research fields in the institutions. Yeah, so I think, and anyone else can chime in, and that was in the group. That were kind of my points I took up from our discussions.
Thanks, Sabina. Shane, any thoughts?
No, it's just very interesting for me. I don't have the same international perspective that Holly and the others have. I'm much more just accustomed to what is happening in the US. And so it's really interesting for me to hear these different models of, here most everything is done through academic universities or academic medical centers. And so having the kind of mix of NGOs, hospitals, universities is really interesting. But at the same time, the similarities of having kind of what I'm hearing you say are the strengths of having decentralized support and the strengths of centralized support. I think we would hear the same things from administrators here in the US. They would talk in very similar terms. So it's really interesting to me.
Well, thanks to everyone. I mean, obviously we could have a whole day to discuss this and brainstorm, but I hope now you've connected with the administrators and you all can start sharing ideas going forward. We're going to shift now into the second segments for the sake of time. Let me pull up. Got a lot of windows, y'all, bear with me. All right. So now we're going into the second session. Shane?
All right, thank you. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here. We were talking about kind of organizational structure, and now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the relationship between the administrators and the investigators. Whoops.
Yep, sorry.
So I want to kind of point out first that in a lot of our organizations, and this may or may not be true in your particular organization, is that there might be two kind of parallel hierarchies operating within the organization. So in this case, I've got a hospital hierarchy on one side where there's clear organizational responsibilities. There's kind of a chain of command, and the job titles are more administrative, right? Like you might hear terms like a vice president, a director, accountants, administrators, right? Like you have more kind of what you would expect from an organizational hierarchy. But then some of our institutions also have these academic hierarchies where you have department chairs, division chiefs, and lots of different faculty appointments, depending on what someone's role is, that may or may not be clear as to where they fit into the hierarchy. I know at our institutions, we have many different layers of faculty. And in any of these organizations, the research administrators might report to the hospital or the organizational hierarchy. They might report to a professor or to an investigator, or they might have reporting structures to both. And so this can be very different than what you would have if you just had a normal kind of a job at a corporation, right? Like you'd really only have that one organizational hierarchy. And our research organizations are much more likely to kind of have these dual parallel hierarchies that can make things complicated. And so on this slide, what I'm trying to talk about is that even within our individual investigators, you can have differences. And what I have here on the slide is kind of on the one side, I have professional degrees. So for us, these are things like the medical degree, where someone is a physician, or they're a professional nurse, or a pharmacist, right? So these types of degrees that they earn are geared towards practitioners. So people who are going to see patients, give clinical care, right? These types of degrees have standardized tests, kind of benchmarks set by professional organizations as to what competencies someone has to have these careers. If they receive research training, it might be peripheral to what they learn in school. It might only be a couple of weeks of research training, because most of what they're training is around patients and treating them. On the other hand, we can have investigators or faculty who have research-centric degrees. In the United States, this is the PhD. I think that's pretty broadly known, that this is a research degree, right? Like they're not trained to deal with patients. They are not trained to administer care or administer pharmaceuticals or drugs, right? They're trained to do research. And their training, instead of having kind of these standardized tests or professional benchmarks, it's much more of a mentorship relationship. They study under another investigator, or they study under another researcher. Their career training is much more eccentric, right? Like it could just be whatever that mentor is teaching them, or whatever career path that mentor had, they try and pass down. It's much more a mentor-mentee relationship. And the institution where they study can play a much bigger role, right? Because they don't have the national professional standards that are set for doctors, nurses, pharmacists, et cetera. Those standards tend to be set at the national level. Whereas with a research degree, I think people are much more likely to cross borders. They can receive mentorship from any type of researcher. And so I think it's just important to recognize that when you're working with an investigator, keep this in mind. If they have know what kind of training they may have received in their schooling, because that's going to determine a little bit about how they are approaching research, right? Are they going to be seeing patients, or are they just going to be in the laboratory? Do they have formal research training, or is it something that they've kind of learned on the job? I think it's also important to recognize, and I've got a note here on the bottom, that when they receive grants, sometimes the grant is intended to provide training around certain things. So if someone only had that professional degree and they were just trained as a physician, they might receive a grant that helps them learn the research skills. So it's not stagnant, right? Like they might learn things over the course of their career that expands that. But I think it can just be helpful to understand just who this individual is that you're working with and what their background is. That can help you as an administrator to support them. So on this slide, we just want to make the point that these investigators are often wearing many different hats. That's just a metaphor to say they have lots of different job duties, right? So on the first box here, they might be the principal investigator, but they might also be responsible for teaching classes or mentoring students. They might have appointments at multiple institutions, right? Like they might teach at multiple institutions, or they might have a private medical practice outside of the university or the research institution. And then even within a single research institution, they might have responsibilities to their academic department, to their laboratory, to collaborative centers. And then they may also be responsible for roles on academic journals or professional journals. They might have a role in a company, or they might advise government boards. So this is just to kind of say that they have, their focus might be split in a lot of different ways, and they might be switching tasks frequently.
And in your context, especially for the clinician scientist, you know, they may have a job in the medical center, which is overseen by the Ministry of Health, and they have to do the work for the Ministry of Health. They may have a teaching responsibility, which is at the university, which is run by the Ministry of Education. Then, oh, by the way, they may have a political appointment in the Ministry of Health. And oh, by the way, they may also have a private practice. And oh, by the way, they may also have a couple of private companies that they work for. So we know that the investigators have a lot of demands, and the research projects may be a small proportion. And so it can be challenging when their attention and time is split, and that they can't maybe always pay attention to what you would like them to pay attention to. It's just recognizing that they have many bosses and many demands, especially when you're dealing with the different ministries. That time is not negotiable most of the time.
And so on this slide, we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that they face. We've talked about the many hats that they're wearing, but it's also true that the problems they are trying to address in the clinic or in their science are usually very large scale problems or very complicated problems that they might spend their entire lifetime working on. I heard in our small group, one organization was kind of founded to help address HIV and AIDS, right? Well, that's been a problem that's been going on for decades, and researchers have been studying that for decades and will continue to work on that. So these are big, complicated societal problems that they have dedicated their life to working on. They're frequently subject to peer review, whether that's grants or publications or just their job appointments. And when we talk about peer review, that means their colleagues at their institution or at other institutions are judging them, evaluating how good is their work, and deciding whether or not they get a grant, whether they get a publication, or whether they get a promotion based on the quality of their work. And that can be very intense. Even within their institution, they're often competing for resources with other investigators, other faculty, right? They have to prove that their work is important, that it's going to make progress, or they might lose what resources they have. And so along those same lines, if they do have a lab or research staff or facilities, that depends on, and in many cases, that depends on their success getting outside money. And if they don't get that outside money, they can lose those resources, that staff, they might have to let them go. And so I just want to kind of pause and note this at the bottom. We're saying all of this just to say that they have a lot of competing priorities. They have a lot of demands on them. We still should expect them to treat their colleagues professionally, and to be understanding of our jobs. But we also just want to be empathetic and help them navigate these organizations and these compliance challenges to achieve what are really admirable missions. So here we just going to kind of recommend a way of how to think about this. So research administrators shouldn't be, at least here, I teach our research administrators, they shouldn't be overly deferential, right? Like they shouldn't just give in to whatever it is that the investigator is demanding or requesting. But at the same time, they shouldn't be trying to police their behavior or tell them what they can and cannot do. So it's really it goes back to this balanced role of compliance and support, of really trying to balance both of these things. So what we do advise is, in that balance, you're looking to be their trusted advisor. So when they come to you and say, I want to do this, you say, well, the rules say we can't do it exactly that way, but I know what you're trying to achieve. And so let me help you find a way to get there. Let me help you find a way to do what you want to do that's not going to break the rules or not going to get us in trouble. And so you really become that trusted advisor to help them navigate the compliance or the rules. So just some quick points about the differences between the communication styles. I know in my breakout group, we talked about how, you know, the faculty do the science and the administrators don't always have that background. But I want to highlight that you do have a background in very important skills, but it does make the communication a little bit challenging. So for the faculty, I think it's helpful to remember that they're experts in a very narrow field, right? Like they've received exceptional training to do a specific type of work. But this also means they're very achievement oriented, right? Like they're trying to accomplish things. They're analytical and they're deliberative, which might mean they ask you a lot of pointed questions. It might seem like you're getting grilled about, like, well, why can't I do that? Or why is that the rule? I don't think that's a good idea, right? They've been trained to try to be creative, to think about how things could be, not how they are now. And so that research mindset might make them very analytical and deliberative, and they might be argumentative with you about those rules and regulations. As administrators, we're much more generalists, right? Like we have broad training. We understand kind of the organization as a whole. We're adaptable, we're practical, and we should be the ones who are experts at navigating the organization, making connections to other groups, making connections to other institutions, understanding what the policies are and how to kind of navigate through them. So that's really the different roles here. We both serve very important functions. I don't think the science would get done without the administrators supporting that. All right, so here we're just going to lay out some recommendations, but I want to acknowledge that everybody's context and situation is very different. And so I'm really looking forward to this next set of breakout rooms where we can talk through this. So these are just my recommendations to the folks that I work with. Don't be intimidated by the faculty. Even with the folks that I work with here, and they work with researchers day in and day out, they can be afraid to talk to them. And I would just say, like, don't be afraid to talk to them. Make sure that that communication is two directional, that you're communicating with them as much as you'd like them to communicate with you, but avoid ending conversations with no, right? Like this goes back to that trusted advisor role where I say, if they say they want to do something that you know is against the rule, it's, well, let me help you find a way where we can get this done, or find a way to accomplish what you're trying to do a different way. Develop realistic expectations for that communication, right? Like know that they have lots of competing demands on their time, so that when they are working with you as an administrator, it might be a short period of time, but they have to communicate with you. So make it good, right? Like make sure that you get your points across and that you get what you need from them. Promote collaboration with other units, right? If you know that in order to have a successful project, you have to work well with finance or legal or those other groups, it can be your job as the administrator to make sure that those transitions and that communication is smooth between those groups. Offer suggestions and options to help them achieve their goals. This can be very valuable. You become a very trusted colleague when you're able to give them solutions to the problems that they're running into with administration. As much as possible, we try and maintain a proactive attitude. Every day is different, and we all have bad days, but trying to kind of be proactive in solving the problems can be very helpful for the faculty. And this last point kind of speaks to having those realistic expectations. When you do need to communicate, keep it short and keep it clear so that they get the main point that you're trying to make, right? Like you want them to take away from your email or your text or whatever, the main point that you're trying to get across to them. So you want to keep that communication just clear and concise wherever possible.
Thanks, Shane. A lot of this is intuitive. As Shane describes, sort of the differences between a faculty mindset and an administrative mindset, I think is helpful to remember. It can be very challenging when you are, sticking to the policy and the investigator really wants to get things done and the policy just doesn't allow it. One of my age-old comments is, I'm saying no to get to yes, but here are the reasons I'm saying no. And here is the policy. It's not Holly Castle blocking you. It's not, Holly Castle saying you can't do it. It's a Vanderbilt Medical Center policy. Here's the policy. It's a funding agency policy. Here's the policy, that kind of thing. So it's just, as Shane said, is being supportive while ensuring that you are respected as the trusted advisor and as administrator. So we're gonna get into a random breakout group. I'm really excited about this discussion. And we want to just kind of brainstorm, like I shared my experience. How do you navigate challenges? What are the attributes that you've had to develop in your skill set that help you be an effective administrator? And that's going to be the focus. We're going to compare and contrast. I think we're going to have a lot of similarities. We may not speak the same language. We may not be from the same country, but we all work with investigators, and that's going to create a whole host of similar problems, right? We all work with policy and funding agency and deadlines and people turning in things late, and everything's on fire. We're trying to get everything taken care of. That's our skill set. That's what we know how to do. So I really look forward to that discussion. And then we really want to hear from you guys. What are your recommendations? What are the tips and tricks? And again, from each breakout group, we're going to have someone report out and sort of synthesize that information. But before we go into breakout groups, Anne, do we have any questions?
Excuse me. No, none that I have seen in the chat.
All right. Any questions? I'll open it up to the class. Fantastic. All right. Hillary, you want to break us down?
Sorry, I'm muted. How much time do you want, Holly?
We've got plenty of time. So maybe 15 minutes.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
1 second. Okay, I think we're evenly divided here. I'm going to send you guys all out, and we'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thanks, Hillary.
I put everyone in a room this time, just so you know. Did you guys get the notice to join a group? Adani, let me know if you're having issues. Okay.